Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now, if you have ever felt overwhelmed by the CAGED system and all that complexity, or you just want a kind of a simpler way to understand and really get to know the fretboard really inside out, today's video is for you. And by the end of this, I'm going to show you how you can actually play any chord or create any chord just using two basic shapes. So some cool chord shapes like these. So let's get into it. Okay, so you probably have heard of the CAGED system, right? It's this way of understanding all the chords and all the scales on the guitar going all the way up and down the neck of the guitar. But let's be honest, it's kind of a bit confusing. There's a lot of stuff to learn, and some of that stuff you don't really need or you don't really ever use. So what if there's a simpler, better way that's going to get you results fast? So here's the deal. In music, there's really only two types of chords. There's two basic kind of chord shapes that you can play on the guitar, and everything you ever play can be derived from those two basic shapes. And those two shapes are a triad or a power chord. And everything else is just going to be variations or inversions or stacks of those two basic ideas. So let's start with that. Why not simplify things? All right, so we're going to start off. I'm going to show you the two basic shapes. And we're going to start on the 6th string where the root note is on the 6th string. So these are going to be called root 6 triads and root 6 power chords. So let's start off with that first one. So this is going to be a triad. Now, here's the thing with this stuff. This kind of system here is really dependent on kind of understanding intervals and understanding the relationship of the notes to each other. So let me kind of break that down for you a little bit. So the basic triad shape, I'm starting on the 6th string, is like this. And what that is a G chord, and it comes from the root, the 3rd, and the 5th. Those three notes form a triad chord. What you want to do is be able to kind of like walk up and down, kind of figure out what's the 2nd, what's the 3rd, what's the 4th, what's the 5th and stuff. So basically, if you start on your root note, you walk up to your 3rd, that's the interval of a 3rd, and then if you keep going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's your 5th. So those three notes together form a triad chord. And then basically on top of that, you're going to stack more notes from the same chord, and you're going to end up with a G chord. So that's one. And then the other kind of chord is basically a power chord. And what that is derived from is just the root and then the 5th. And then it can be the root again as well. So basically a G power chord is like this. Now, once you start to kind of blend these two things together to create chords, because of course there's 6 strings on a guitar, what you're going to end up with is with this first chord here, this G chord, you've got a triad and then actually a power chord on top of that triad. So if you look here, there you've got the 1, 3, 5, or the root, 3rd, and 5th. And then on the top, you've got the root, the 5th, and then another octave. So that is a stacked triad chord and then a power chord. And it's the opposite with this one. You've got a power chord, and then if you look here, starting on this part here, that is root, 3rd, 5th, which is the triad again. So you basically got a triad and a power chord, opposite power chord and triad. Okay, so there's your G chord. Now, the next place you can play, the next easiest one to find, is where the root note is on the 5th string. So to find the root note on the 5th string, all you're going to have to do is go up 7 frets. So there's my G on the 6th string, and there's the octave above, G on the A string, on the 5th string. And here's where it gets interesting, is it's exactly the same thing again. You're going to do a triad going back this way. So you got the triad down here. You got your root, your 3rd, and your 5th. And if you look there, it's the same shape, it's the same type of chord as down here, it's just an octave higher. And if you want to kind of finish that off, you'd end up with this chord here. So that's a root 5 triad shape. Now, of course, in the CAGED systems, you'd call that the C shape, because it's basically just like a C chord that you move up. But here, basically, you're just thinking root, 3rd, 5th, and then finish it off by stacking another triad on top of that. So you got root, 3rd, 5th, and then a root 3rd on top. And then the other one is your power chord going this way. There's your G power chord octave higher. And then on top of that, you've got of course we're running out of strings here, you've just got 2 strings left. But that shape there is root, 3rd, and 5th. So you've got the power chord, and then you've got the triad on top. So what you end up with is the triad shape here, and then the power chord shape here. So far we've got a root 6 triad shape, root 6 power chord shape, or a bar chord, and then we've got the root 5 triad shape, which is like a C chord. It's the C shape in the CAGED system. And then you got the root 5 power chord shape, which is like which in the CAGED system would be like an A chord. But can you see there the relationship between these 2 shapes are the same, but they're just starting on different strings. So there you have it. And then the final one is root 4. The root 4 one's a little bit different because then you're getting into territory where you're not really playing on the bass notes of the guitar anymore. So they become kind of like these half bar type chords. And the main one that you use would be like this shape here, or this shape here. But it's the same thing again. Basically you've got the triad. So here's a G triad shape, root 3rd, 5th. But really that's just the top part of this chord anyway. And then the kind of middle ground that ties it all together is this shape here, which is like the D, it's called the D shape in the CAGED system. But here what you're doing is basically you're on the 4th string, root 4, and then you're playing a power chord shape, and then you've got the triad shape on top, the root and 3rd. So rather than having to learn this, like in the CAGED system, you've got the C, A, G, E, and the D shape, and you've got to learn all those shapes, and then you've got to learn all the, you've got to go through and learn all these different shapes, and then you've got to learn the minor versions of those shapes. In this idea, it's the same information, but we're breaking it down, we're kind of boiling it down to like either triad or bar chord, triad or bar chord on the root 6, or root 5, or root 4. Okay, so that's the basic idea there. Now, once you've got that down, the cool thing is you can start to build any chords out of that. And the other great thing is you're starting to kind of get this sense of like what the intervals you're actually playing are. Like, are you playing triads where you've got the 3rd, the root, and then the 3rd, or are you playing power chords? And that starts to influence the kinds of chords you can build. So for example, when you're playing this root 6 chord, what you want to do is start to kind of like figure out what the notes are that surround it. And then for the power chord shape, I'll jump to the root 5 now. See all the way the notes just kind of weave around that shape. You've got your root, 3rd, 5th, and then when you go to the A shape, so you can see how the notes and the scales kind of start to fit together and kind of like tie those intervals together. So what you can then do is you can start to kind of build more interesting chords. For example, really easy in these kind of open shapes, you can just start to add in notes. So for example, if you want to find your 7th to make it a dominant 7th chord, just you walk up to the 7th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then so that's the idea of how you can start to build these chords. On the guitar, a lot of really interesting chords are built around 7th chords. So for example, let's say if we take this root 5 G shape here, which is like this, I can turn that into a 7th chord just by walking up the scale. There's the dominant 7, the flat 7. So instead of playing it like this, I'm just going to add that note in, that F note, and then it's going to give me this chord here. So that's a G7 chord. I'm using the triad shape and then adding in a flat 7. which is how you build a dominant 7th chord. And then I've got the octave on top. So once you've built that chord, so much music is kind of built around that shape. So dominant chords are really the source for all kinds of chords like ninths, sharp nines, flat nines, sharp fives, flat fives. All those kind of interesting kind of chords will start as a dominant chord, but then you're going to add in those altered notes. So for example, if I want to turn this chord into a ninth, I'm just going to walk up to the ninth note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I've got this 7th chord here, adding in this note, and you get this. So that's a G9 chord, right? You might have seen that chord. That chord is all over the place in jazz and blues. Now, if I want to make that a sharp 9 chord, I'm just going to take that 9th note and raise it, and all of a sudden I've got the Jimi Hendrix chord. Or a flat 9, which is more like, you hear that more in jazz music, you're going to flatten that note. So you've got this cool sounding chord here. And so on. So you can see how you can take those basic chords and start to add in flat 5s, sharp 5s, flat 9s, all these interesting notes. All right, so once you've figured out your basic chord shape, so you got your root 6 with these 2 shapes, and then you got your root 5 with the 2 shapes, and then your root 4. So then you can start to add the different notes to the chord. So for example, it's real easy down here on this root 6 kind of G shape. You can just start adding in the notes of the scale. So you add in a 6th, major 7, a 9th. It's a real nice chord. A sus, major 7. So you can just kind of basically walk up the scale. So it's pretty easy just adding those notes in. It starts to become more useful when you're doing it around any of these kind of actual bar shaped. In open positions, obviously, it's pretty easy. But when you do these bar shapes, so there's the root 6 bar chord. So basically, you can start to add in those different notes. So for example, here's the basic chord, and then go down a half step to make it a major 7, go down a whole step to make it a dominant 7, go down to the 6th. So you can see how you can make all those different shapes. You can add in a 6th right there, or a 7th right here, or a 9th on top. So there's all these different shapes that you can make just from this basic chord here. And then if you go to the root 5 chord, some really cool stuff with this one. So you start here, and then you can go up, turn into a 6th, like that. Now here's where it gets interesting. Add in a 7th, right there, and you get this chord here. So much music, so many interesting chords are built around dominant 7th chords. So dominant 7th chords are major chords with a flat 7. And they're really prevalent in all blues or rock music's based around that basic sound. Well, dominant 7 chord, because there's kind of tension built into that chord. So what you can do is you can build on that tension, so you can add all these cool notes to a dominant 7th chord. So for example, if I walk up the scale to the 9th note, then it turns into a 9th chord. And then you can move that 9th. It can be a flat 9 or a sharp 9, or you can go up even further, turn it into an 11th. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Or keep going up, turn it into a 13th right here. 13. So you can build all these cool chords just from that. All those great chords. And then you can do the same thing from the root 5 bar chord shape. Major, major 7, dominant 7, major 6, and so on. You can just change, you can just add all these notes to the chord. And then finally with the root 4 shape, I'll do this D shape here. You can just play around with it, just the same thing, you know, and you can, it's almost like adding little melodic movements to the chord. So basically the idea there is you can take any chord, you can start by going, is the root on the 6th string, the 5th string, or the 4th string, and then once you figured out where the root is it going backwards to the triad shape, or a variation of that? Or is it going forwards to the power chord shape, or a variation of that? Or, you know, all different variations on it. And then from there you can build and extend the chords by taking the basic triad or power chord and then adding the extra notes from the scale or the altered notes from outside the scale to create any kind of chord you want, just by adding on top of that. And of course, that's just the major chords and the 7th chords. But then you can do exactly the same thing with the minor chords or diminished chords or augmented chords, you know, so you can take your root 6 minor chord right here, and then you can play it backwards using the triad going back here like that. A little bit harder with the minor chord, but it's the same idea, and you can vary that chord. And then you've got the root 5 right here, and then going backwards to the triad shape here. With minor chords, with the triad shapes, they're a little bit harder to recognize because most of the time you'll end up tweaking them to take the triad and then add in a 7th. So for example, all these different kind of chord shapes, but they're all built around the same basic idea of these stacks of triads or power chords and kind of building them on top of each other and adding notes to them. Let me kind of lay out the fretboard. I'm going to pick one key and kind of build out the whole fretboard for you. So let's take the key of D minor, and so let's start down here. This would be our most basic way of playing a D minor chord. Of course, that right there is a root 4 minor chord. And then basically once you kind of know your intervals, you can start to kind of move these notes around. So there's my 7th, right? So I could turn that into a D minor 7 chord or a D minor 6. So you just gotta start to play around with these shapes. So let's go over to the root 5. So basically on the root 5 you've got 2 shapes, one going this way, which will be your power chord. Now to make it a minor, we're gonna add in the minor triad on top of the power chord. So you've got this, there's your root, there's your 5th, and then you've got this, that's a minor triad. So you've got your root, minor 3rd, and 5th. So there's a D minor chord. And then if you're going to start on the triad form, you've got your root here, 3rd, and then 5th right here. So when you're playing minor chords, it's a little bit more awkward here like this because you kind of run out of fingers. But as long as you know that's your root, your 3rd, and 5th, you can start to build some interesting chords around that. So for example, if I want to play a minor 7 chord, I can just walk up the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there's my minor 7 note. So I can build this little chord here. So that's a beautiful way of playing a D minor 7 chord. And then you can start to extend that if you want to turn that into a D minor 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you got D minor 9 right there. You can see how you can start to kind of play with these chords. Add a fifth on top. Or add an 11th on top. Some really nice sounding chords. But it's all derived from that minor triad right here. And then if you go over to the power chord shape here, going this way, it's really easy. You can create all kinds of chords just by adding in the 7th right there by lifting this finger off. D minor 7. You can add in a 6th or a 7 here. 11th. So you've got all those really cool sounding chords just by adding or detracting fingers. Okay, so go over to the root 6, and again you've got the minor thirds. It's a little bit more tricky to play because you're kind of running out of fingers. But you got your root, 3rd, and 5th right there. So you can kind of extend that into a minor chord like this. Kind of cool. Or a lot of people just kind of play it like this, which would be a minor 7th chord. Or even there's lots of different ways to do it. But you can just kind of play around with it. But as long as you know you're starting with this root, 3rd, 5th, and then you can kind of build from there. And then you got your power chord shape going this way. So before you know it, you've kind of like built this kind of map of the fretboard with all these types of cool chords in D minor, but it's all based around your root notes, which are right here, root 6, root 5, and root 4. They're your kind of anchors, and from there you can go backwards with your triads, or you can go forwards with your power chords, and you can create all these different cool chords. So there you have it. It's a simpler, more intuitive way to kind of think about the fretboard, and it takes that kind of cage system idea and it simplifies it down to these two basic shapes, where you're either going kind of backwards with your triad or moving forwards with that power chord, and you're stacking these shapes on top of each other. So experiment with it, see what you think. Let me know your comments and your thoughts. But this is a big part of kind of how I see the guitar. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe on the channel we've got lots more content about vintage guitars and cool effects and all kinds of rock and roll music. So let me know your comments and what you'd like to see more of. So I hope you have fun with this, and we'll see you next time.